So today we're taking a look at what we call voice. And so writing number one is going to grade you on three different things. It's going to grade you on your content, what you're actually writing about. It's going to grade you on your grammar, as well as it's going to grade you on what we call voice or diction. This is sort of developing your style of writing, your sort of what you sound like coming through your words. And so this is what separates good writers from really great writers. The thing is, in high school and in middle school and all through schooling, I guess we kind of all kind of funnel into the same type of writers because we all write the same essays, the same formats. And so we end up having the same voice. And so something's cool about when you write something, someone's like, yeah, it sounded like you. And that's your voice. And that's what's going to separate you from everybody else on your college applications, on your essays, all those things. So we're going to focus on voice. So besides the grammatical voices, we'll get to eventually in our second unit about active and passive voice. There's also what we call the rhetorical voice. Rhetorical is sort of like your rhetoric, the language that you use. This is sort of where your opinions emerge. This is where your attitude emerges. This is your tone, and this is your voice. So writing number one is asking you, in order to get the perfect score on voice, is to have a distinctive, attitude-filled, expressive, engaging voice. So to add voice to your writing most effectively, there's a couple techniques I can teach you, because this is the most nebulous category in writing. You're like, okay, how do I get better at having good voice? And so you might be a really good writer, or you might be a person who writes okay, but you just struggle with having good voice. So I try to give you some concrete skills to try. First one is your vocabulary. Try varying your vocabulary. You don't necessarily need this overabundance of "look how smart I am" words, or "I should be arrested for abusing the thesaurus" words. I'm not always impressed with large, big words. But I don't want also vocabulary that makes you sound like a teenager. You want to sound mature. You want to sound intelligent. You want to sound smart. And that's good voice. That doesn't necessarily mean intelligent, smart is big words. Example, this is from Emily Bishop, who graduated a couple years ago. In her writing number one, she writes, "Every year, classrooms are vehemently decorated with identical posters featuring motivational quotes or pictures of cats from the internet in a feeble attempt to seem relatable." She would say the word seem, not see. In this case, the word relatable is a great word to use. Yeah, she used vehemently, which is a fun word, but I really like that word, relatable. Her whole piece is about teachers and how they try to relate to their students. And so it's a fun word, not crazy hard vocabulary. Another technique is to try to be bold and spunky. Now, be careful. Now, being bold and spunky does not necessarily mean being outrageous. You don't have to be outrageous in the things that you say and be like, "Wow, that was so shocking. You have a great voice." No, sometimes you're just shocking and you're weird. It's about being confident and unapologetic. It's about saying, "You know what, this is what I believe in," or "I'm not going to apologize for my attitude or my belief." And so watch making the whole piece maybe too plucky or snarky or aggressive. Because sometimes if the whole piece is that way, then it's a turnoff. But if occasionally you have some snarky comments or something that's a little more aggressive, where you're like, "Ooh, that was a little bit bold to say," yeah, that's a fun little rhythm. Throwing those things in occasionally. So here's an example. Alyssa Cunningham, who graduated a couple years ago, she wrote her writing number one about fruit salads. And so she writes, "Whoever put whole grapes in a salad has never gone through the frustration of trying to stab them with a fork. The agonizing process is like a slow motion film." Yeah, that's fun. It's bold. I like that. Here's another one from Hannah Adams, who wrote about people's infatuation with Starbucks. She says, "Starbucks has a fancy and privileged connotation that obligates its customers to share their purchased beverages with the world through Snapchats and Facebook posts, as if to say, 'Ooh, look how fancy I look with my fancy coffee.' People will pay any price to feel expensive." Once again, no crazy hard vocabulary, but there's certainly some boldness here. Another one from Ellie Crumpler a couple years ago. She writes, "Unlike clothing, the brand of paper towels you use isn't on display for the world to see. No one will go snooping through your cabinets, judging you on the brand of cereal you buy. So why do people still reach for Heinz ketchup over the 50-cent cheaper Great Value bottle?" And she's writing about just simply this infatuation with name brands. It's great. Here's another technique. Try being playful with your style. Being playful with your style usually makes your voice playful, because if your style's playful, then you have fun writing it. But watch making the piece so playful that the content suffers and it feels fluffy and silly. I've had that happen a few times where someone tries so hard to be stylistic and fun and playful that by the end you're like, okay, but I didn't really learn anything, and you lost your content. Here's an example of what I mean. Larson Kessler was writing about wisdom teeth, and so she writes some fragments. Lose a thumb? Good luck texting. Rupture a spleen? Good luck standing. It's a fun little style. Abby Gorley was writing about chick flicks, and she writes, sure, some parts of a romance movie can be heartwarming, but a whole movie on that? Puke. Once again, it's bold, but what I'm really drawing you to is they ask questions. They use that word. She used that word sure at the very beginning. She uses puke as a single word sentence. It's fun style, and you can tell they're having fun writing it. Another technique is to use adverbs. Adverbs give you a little bit of an attitude. It tells us where you stand on something, particularly when you're expressing a fact, because you can't deny a fact, but you can have an attitude about that fact. So if I said, in Pride and Prejudice, Charlotte agrees to marry Mr. Collins because she has no better choice. Okay. Better voice would be, in Pride and Prejudice, Charlotte desperately agrees to marry Mr. Collins. Now there's a little bit of an attitude. She desperately agrees. Ooh. Or even better, pathetically, Charlotte in Pride and Prejudice agrees to marry Mr. Collins out of her own desperation. Not only are you calling her desperate, you also said the whole thing is pathetic. That is attitude. That's voice. Another thing to try are your verbs. Your verbs can show how you personally feel. So if I said the NRA holds firmly to its rights in the Second Amendment, fine. But what if I said the NRA clings passionately to its rights as established by the Second Amendment? Now they're not just simply holding, they're clinging passionately. And you didn't just simply say that it's in the Second Amendment, you said it's established. It lets me know where you stand. You were like, hey, this is established. There's no debate about this. Better voice. The NRA embraces its rights as assured by the Second Amendment. Now, not only is it established, but now you're saying it's assured. Once again, not only are you stating a fact, but you're showing me where you stand in a very subtle way with your voice. It's perfect. Lastly, try using some italics. Italics I don't use them a lot, but occasionally using them is a nice way of showing that you mean to be casual. You mean to be colloquial in your formal writing, because you don't want to have a lot of casual words or slang throughout your essay, but occasionally putting it in sparingly, that's smart. So if I said, if such hero worship for athletes, many fall under the pressure of fame. Gripping, I know. But what if I said, with such so-called hero worship for sports stars, it's no wonder that so many of these so-called stars fall under the pressure of self-prescribed fame. So now I'm really hitting that word hero, and I'm calling them stars, but you can see I'm using so-called stars. And so by italicizing it, you kind of get a sense of like, oh, I think he's not just simply drawing attention to it, but he has a little bit of an attitude. I don't know if he necessarily believes that they're actually stars. Not just simply that word so-called, but he really is highlighting it by italicizing it. But sometimes you can go too far. This one goes too far. And I think it's important for you to see, where do you cross the line? Because they are looked at as heroes for just being athletes, a lot of these sports stars are just thugs and losers who fall under the pressure of fame. This kind of, to me personally, goes past the line of what's acceptable. Sure, it's your opinion, but sometimes if you use a phrase like thug or loser, you've alienated the audience. As opposed to trying to persuade them or have them understand where you're coming from, you may have insulted them. And at that point, you've gone too far. And so this is too casual. This is too slangy, and I would avoid this. So once again, the best advice for you, be original and true to yourself. If you have a hard time figuring out what your voice is, try writing essay number 1 in first person. Writing with the word I is a good way of just trying to generate your own personal voice. Never be afraid to be spunky and bold. Just don't be outlandish and silly. All right? Don't go too far just for the sake of going too far. Don't be silly. It ruins your content. And lastly, if it feels stiff, or if it feels safe, or it feels overly academic, it feels like a keyhole, same old essay you've always written, it probably is. If it's fun to reread to yourself, then it'll be fun for someone else to read. Okay?